Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and Jeff Berkowitz joins us from Chicago. And Jeff, we are going to be talking about a number of significant subjects this week. But folks, before we get started, please give us a like. If you're watching us on video, on YouTube, I should say, give us a like and leave us a comment on any number of topics that we're going to be talking about. Give us your opinion. Jeff and I will both be reading that. And Jeff, one of the things that we are going to be starting off the conversation with is overnight, a federal court ruled that the use of tariffs by President Trump in his effort to renegotiate international trade is not legal, according to the court. You'll have more to say about that, but I want to start with the White House comment that was issued this morning as we tape this on May 29. And the comment by the White House is that foreign countries' non-reciprocal treatment of the United States has fueled America's historic and persistent trade deficits, and that these deficits have created a national emergency that have decimated American communities, left our workers behind, and weakened our defense industrial base. And it is not for unelected judges to decide how to properly address a national emergency. And the phraseology here is critical, that national emergency, because I would argue the White House is trying to find some wiggle room, legal wiggle room, that they can justify the president's use of him inserting tariffs rather than the tariffs going through the federal Congress. Now, you have taken a look at the ruling by the court. I don't know that you've committed it all to memory, but from what you've seen, and I'll remind people that Jeff has a legal education. He is a reformed lawyer. But what is your legal analysis of what the court said? Yeah.
Well, not having digested all 50 pages of the opinion, I have gleaned from it that this opinion essentially says it's a three-judge panel to start with. One of the judges appointed by President Reagan, another by President Obama, and a third by President Trump. So it's balanced, you could say, in terms of philosophy, and it's well thought out from a quick look. And what it examines is, does the 1977 legislation, federal legislation, that's when Jimmy Carter was president, and that is known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, or IEPA, you'd say. Does that legislation give the power to the President of the United States, what the court called basically unbounded power, to issue, not to pass, because it's not legislation, I guess by executive order? Whatever he's doing here is the executive, Article 2 of the Constitution. Does that legislation, which comes from Article 1 of Congress, does that give this president the power to set tariffs basically on unlimited products for virtually every country in this world? That we're doing that. And the answer is a resounding no. That is, the legislation did not grant that power, so this really is unconstitutional legislation. I don't know if the court used those words. It certainly exceeded the bounds of the legislation that was passed in 1977. And in 1802, more than 200 years ago, the Supreme Court established in Marbury, the last word on everything comes from the judges who the courts said the Constitution provides for judicial review. This is judicial review, Terry. You can't say, oh, they're doing something wrong. You may have disagreed with the opinion, but it is the clear constitutional power of the courts to have the last word on legislation. And if they say this does not, number one, this exceeds the bounds of the legislation, or it's an unconstitutional act because it does exceed the bounds, it has to be dealt
I
with.
know you just
And unless
skimmed
that's
this, but
reversed by
you
the
didn't have
Supreme Court.
time to read what, a 50-page
Right.
judgment. Uh, did did you notice any conversation or anything, and maybe you just didn't have time to, about them talking about the president has the authority to act in case of an emergency, which the White
Well,
House in
yeah,
the statement we read was using that
right.
phrase.
Yeah, and basically it said this is not an emergency. These deficits that he's saying are emergency have, as he's been talking about, have been with us for a long time. It's not like something. It's if they're not fixed tomorrow, the country will fall apart. Some would say they never have to be fixed. Okay, so I don't think this court did not think, these three judges did not think that a case had been made that there was any kind of emergency that would justify this excessive uh, interpretation of this legislation as granting him the power, the president of the power to make these really unlimited moves, unbounded
It
moves.
seems like a
Of
strong
course,
argument when you note that these are the policies that have been in effect that Trump is trying to change, but they've been in effect for years. And so it is sound like a good argument by the court to say this isn't an emergency if something
right,
has been going on for, frankly, decades. That it's not how we use the term emergency, as 9/11 was an emergency, something that
right.
came out of the blue. But obviously, the White House will be appealing that decision, so we'll have to see. I told Jeff off camera that when Trump was doing this, and I don't have the legal background Jeff has, but it did seem to me, does the president have the authority to be doing this on his own? So that was always kind of in the back of my mind in this tariff discussion, whether that was the legal case. Now, do you have any idea, and maybe you have no idea, it's okay, but when the White House would appeal this, can they do it on an emergency basis? Do you know what happens next? Just trying to advance this. What might we expect now? And earlier today, by the way, Kevin Hassert, economic advisor to the president, was saying they have 3 deals, trade deals, about to be announced. And so the leverage that Trump was using with tariffs was getting these countries to come to the table and renegotiate the tariffs they had on the United States and the restrictive policies they had that was keeping American products from being made or sold rather in their country. So we'll have to see what this does. And the one last thing is we should also remember that Trump's tariffs, as they were enacted, were bringing in billions of dollars in new revenue to the U.S. Treasury. That would now stop. So, I mean, just part of what needs to be considered. But do you have any idea as
Yeah,
far as an appeal and when that might happen?
well, when this opinion came down, as you said, either yesterday afternoon or in the evening, so the I'm sure counsel for the president took a very quick look and decided they would appeal. And usually you file first a notice of appeal with this court, and this would get appealed to what's known as the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. And there are 13 courts of appeals across the country, 1 through 11, and then the DC Circuit, and those are geographic divisions, 1 through 11 of the various states. We here, for instance, live in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. And then what's known as the Fed Circuit, which most people know as dealing with intellectual property matters, patents and copyrights and trademarks, which is one of our few specialized courts. Everything else goes to, whether it's antitrust, whether it's securities, it goes to the court in this geographic jurisdiction, 1 through 11 or DC Circuit. But this Fed Circuit has the specialty of dealing with intellectual property, which I knew of, and now I know deals with these trade matters or customs matters. I think those are the 2 major, if only, matters that the Fed Circuit deals with. So it goes, they're appealing that, and they file a notice of appeal, obviously, and they will almost surely ask for a stay. And I think you would ask initially the court that issued the opinion, although I don't remember this and haven't done a lot of appellate work. I think they would initially ask, that is, the government would ask for a stay of the initial court that issued. And I don't think it's likely to be granted. And I don't think if they appeal, they might appeal the refusal to grant a stay. And I don't think that would be overturned. I don't. Number one, it's not.
Well,
It's
let's
certainly
not get
not.
too far. The point is we don't
So
know. They'll go through the process, and we'll
it
have to
takes a
follow
while.
up
The
on
short
that.
of it, the easy answer is this will take time for the stay to be decided and for the appeal. So I don't think, my prediction, this ain't going to be overturned anytime soon, and it will go to the Supreme Court,
And
even if
we'll see
it's on
what
an
happens. All right, I want
expedited
to move
basis.
along.
Okay.
Staying with economic issues, there's some breaking
Yes,
news
sir.
that just came out a couple of minutes ago as we're taping this on the 29th. That the president invited Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, to the White House. And they said that they met and discussed economic developments, including for growth, employment, and inflation. The headline here is that Trump meets with Powell and tells him it's a mistake not to be lowering interest rates. And the president would be joined in that opinion by quite a lot of economists and CEOs of corporations. Powell has been resistant, says he wants to get more data, but we'll have to see what comes of this. But there is a chance, again, pushing for the economic stories that are going to be impacting the American people. Obviously, if the Fed lowers interest rates, not only does that help with credit card debt or borrowing money to buy a home or buy a car, but in the federal budget, the interest payments on the federal debt are now over $1 trillion. Lowering interest rates, if the Fed were to do that, would also save the federal government billions of dollars in interest payments. So we'll have to see what comes of that, but I wanted to pass that along.
Terry, yeah, if I might say, the Federal Reserve historically does not usually look at things like, well, would this help the federal government to lower interest
Right.
rates because they would help them on the budget? No, as you know, Terry, they look at what the Congress set out as the goals, the dual responsibilities, which is full employment. That's one responsibility for the Fed to look at. And I would call it price stability. They may have another word
And
for it.
price stability.
Those are
So
the
the
two
bottom line is you
focus.
don't want to, we had this inflation under Biden. It's now come down to about 2.5% going from memory now. So it has
Right.
come down a lot. That would be an argument by Powell to say, why should we lower interest rates? On one hand, well, the supporters of the president would say, now that inflation has been beaten, why do you keep interest rates where they are now? Why don't you lower them because inflation has been beaten? However, what the president and the Congress is doing right now, which is to be passing along tax cuts, that's going to be stimulative to the economy. And I don't mean to get too deep in the woods, but I could see where Powell might argue, if I were arguing his case, them say, look, you guys are going to be doing a number of things that you yourselves argue are going to be raising the amount of growth in the economy. And so that could be inflationary. So we might want to just wait to see how things go along. But we'll have to see what happens on that. There's no clear answer.
One quick rejoinder to that is that number one, I mean, the president himself has people going around his surrogates talking about how well the economy is doing in the short time Trump has been there, how strong the economy is. That doesn't argue. That'd be schizophrenic to then turn around and say, oh, but you know, the economy is really needs some stimulus, so we need to lower interest rates. So, you don't want to say that they're schizophrenic. So that's an
To
argument
me, it's
against
not a
it.
clear
And
cut case, and you could
but the
argue
stronger,
both.
Terry, let me just finish
Go
for a
ahead.
second. 30 seconds. The stronger argument is, and the Fed has made this argument, we're not quite there in controlling what we knew was a 9% inflation just a few years ago due to the excessive policies of Biden. So we've lowered inflation, yes, but we're not quite there where we're sure it's done. So that's why we don't want to be premature in lowering interest rates and starting
And
to
for those
stimulate
who
the
don't
economy.
follow Federal Reserve policy, let me just point out very simply, when you raise the cost of borrowing by raising interest rates, it is like putting the brakes on the economy. And when you lower interest rates, it's putting your foot on the gas pedal. So that's just a simple way to kind of understand the impact of what the Federal Reserve policy would be on the economy. Trump is arguing take your foot off the brake. We want to get this economy growing at a faster rate. And one of the big things that is a crisis, many would argue, is the national debt right now is at $37 trillion, where we are spending $1 trillion a year just in interest payments, money that is more than we are spending now on national defense. And so Kevin Hassert and the president and others would argue if we get the economy growing at a faster rate than it has for the last several years, if we're getting the economy growing at 3% a year or 3.5%, Hastert said the second half of this year, 2025, we might be able to get it up if we pass the tax cut bill and some other regulatory reforms. We might have growth of 4%. That would generate a wave of new revenue coming into the government that they could then be using if they chose to pay down the national debt. So that would give us more financial stability in the long run.
Right. The way to get financial stability is to do some cuts in spending that are reasonable, planned, and thoughtful. Things like cutting willy nilly National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for Humanities. We care about those things, Terry. We don't want to waste funds, but we want to support those things that are historically and culturally important to this country. And Trump and Elon Musk, if he's when he's involved, should think about these things. Cut the waste, but don't cut out substantial programs that benefit and they're valued by people. And I've just mentioned a few by people throughout the country. Do these things in the regular order. Don't just say one day, oh, Elon Musk, I got a lot of money. I helped elect this president. So
Jeff,
I'm going to decide.
I
I
don't
don't
want to
think
get
so.
too mired down, but I want to remind people that as we speak, or last week, I should say, the House of Representatives did pass the president's tax cut bill. They passed it by one vote, with the Republicans having such a slim majority, and there were a couple of Republicans that voted present. And so it was a one vote majority, 215 to 214. This bill is now in the U.S. Senate, and we'll have to see. That's what's happening on Capitol Hill right now. It is a huge part of the Trump agenda. And many Republicans say, look, we must pass this bill because if we don't, taxes are going to automatically go up next year if we don't extend the Trump tax cuts of 2017. And there's some additions to the Trump tax cuts of 2017. But just to remind people, and I apologize that this is not the clearest of graphics here, but this is some of the tax increases that you would incur. A married couple with two children earning $165,000 as a couple, their tax would go up $2,400, and a single parent earning $52,000 or more, $1,400. So the last thing the Republicans want to do is fail to pass the bill that is now in the Senate and have taxes go up next year. That's not the moniker they want, the tax raising Republicans. But there are Republicans, Rand Paul of Kentucky is one, Ron Johnson, Rick Scott of Florida, who are saying, the House just didn't cut enough. We're not going to get the budget under control when presently we're spending $2 trillion more in our federal budget every year, more than what we take in revenues. We got to cut more. And many who are saying, look, we'll get there. Pass the tax cuts. We're going to come back and have more bites of the apple. We're going to have subsequent legislation that will be including some of the DOGE findings. And by the way, Elon Musk left yesterday. That was his last day working for Doge. He's going back to run his businesses. Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, will continue operations. And so we would presume they're going to be ferreting out more wasteful spending. So in the future, the Republicans are arguing here, saying, vote for this bill. Don't change it too much. We got to get it back through the House after you're making changes. They're saying don't change it too much because we just don't have any leeway on getting support in the House.
Well, and one thing to remind the senators you just mentioned, there's a very, very thin margin to pass legislation in the House. So they have to be very careful because they can't lose virtually, they can lose no more than 3 Republicans, I think. And if somebody's not there, they can lose no more than 1 or 2. And so the point is, these cuts that these folks just say, oh, we should cut, they ought to think about some of these programs are not wasteful. I mentioned National Endowment for the Humanities. Turns out the National Endowment for the Humanities gives out funds to keep 50 states that have, each state has an Illinois Council on the Humanities. These things are valued. They're not wasteful. They should be thought out. They have cut out programs that have been built out over years that are valued. So they should look at programs that aren't valued, that are wasteful, before they make cuts. And number one, not only is it good policy to do what I just said, it's good politics. Because if the Republicans want to have their majority and increase it, they don't want to lose elections because they just cut willy-nilly and impaired and hurt a lot of people. You can cut out the federal Department of Education if it doesn't do well in terms of, say, helping kids learn how to read or setting policies that kids learn how to read.
And you know what people have noticed that, I mean, for all the money we spent on the U.S. Department of Education, test scores of students now are worse than they were 40-something years ago when the department was created. So they have, there's no, you got to make the argument, what are we gaining by having all this money spent? Maybe it would be better to take the money we're spending for all these bureaucrats in the Department of Education and send it back some tax reforms or tax revenues back to just local schools.
Well, or more to the point, and we'll keep this short, so I know it's not the main thing of the show, but it's so important that in Illinois, not just in Chicago, it's something like 10 to 15% of the kids who are mainly minority at CPS read at grade level around the whole state of Illinois. When you go to Quincy, when you go to Bloomington, when you go to Decatur, around the whole state of Illinois, only 1 out of every 3 kids reads at grade level, I would say reads at all. And in fact, in the inner cities and the big cities across the country, that's true. This is a dramatic problem for the country. And we should allow the kids who are in failing public schools to take their money and go to a school that might teach them better how to read. And that would be a really good goal if you have a Department of Education to look at doing that, to providing exits from failing public schools, to getting the states to do more to offer school choice. 30 states in this country offer a program of school choice to some extent. Illinois just cut out its only program of choice.
Yeah, and other states are expanding school choice. That's something the Republicans, who are in a minority, you might say they're a super minority in Illinois, but certainly something they could be arguing, because it is inarguable that so many of the public schools, as we have in Chicago public school system, are just, the record shows they are doing a lousy job of getting kids educated. But Jeff, I want to get along before we run out of time here. One of the other issues that is being bantied about here and may lead to, apparently will lead to an investigation within the Congress, is who was running the White House during the Biden administration. We've had all these books come out of late with insiders within the White House being quoted by the authors of the book saying that Biden was out of it. He wasn't signing things. It was the auto pen. That he was clearly incapable of being the president and functioning. So we don't know who was really calling the shots. Let's take a look at something we got off of some of the videos off of TikTok here, where someone did a contrast of Joe Biden 9 years ago when he was vice president, and then what is compared to how he was acting as president. Let's take a listen.
Never, ever, ever, ever let their country down. Never.
Joe Biden looked very different just 9 years ago.
Easily. We never bow. We never bend. We never break.
Excuse me, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look,
This fall off needs to be studied.
if we finally beat Medicare.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was in the foothills of the Himalayas with Xi Jinping.
So obviously, Jeff, and we all saw this, and it's kind of amazing that you get these people like Jake Tapper saying, man, we were misled by the White House that he was capable. I think it was pretty obvious to anyone who was watching and being observant that the president had problems. Now, there is a Democratic fundraiser who, Lindy Lee, and she was has really kind of turned against the Democratic Party because she saw what was going on behind the scenes. And she spoke in an interview. Let's listen to some of her comments about how there were insiders who were really the ones calling the shots in the White House.
That doctor. You know who the doctor was? Kevin O'Connor. This is a family business associate. He had a financial interest in propping up the Biden regime, and that is a fundamental problem here. People lied about his cognitive decline because they wanted power. Let's be perfectly honest about that. Exactly. Jill Biden, and I will name the names. Jill Biden, Steve Ricchetti, Mike Donnellan, Anita Dunn, Anthony Bernal. These were the Jeff Zients. These were the people running our country. We had a council of presidents for the past 4 years. We didn't have an elected president. We had these unelected hacks who understood that Biden was our final gravy train, that as soon as he went off into the sunset, they were done. So they wanted to drag this on for forever.
Well, Ms. Lee is exactly on point. There are people who are surrounding the closest people. Jill Biden, his wife, okay? Anita Dunn, a close senior counselor for a long time to Biden and Obama. Those people should be looked at by the oversight committees in Congress, which should be a bipartisan look. If there are laws that were violated, if these people lied in a way that effectively did not carry out their fiduciary duties to the country, to have a person who really wasn't fit to be president, let alone run for president from the get-go. You've just seen this. You see that what he looked like when he was vice president, and he was attuned to things. I was a booster in some respects for Joe Biden then when he was Obama's vice president. But clearly by the time he was running in 2019, he was not with it. He should have never been supported by anybody, but least of all, when they do that,
and yet, Jeff,
they should have dumped. Excuse me. There's an amendment that makes it clear that the cabinet has the power working
and the responsibility, the 26th Amendment,
to remove him.
And yet, what were they doing? They were going to run Joe Biden again, and they said that he was good to go for another 4 years when the man was never good to go, even in his first term.
Those people should be examined closely. They should be subpoenaed, they should be questioned, and if it's necessary, it should be referred to the DOJ for prosecution so this never happens again. Sometimes when somebody is in the cabinet and they sit there and they come out and say, oh, he runs circles, that person should be gotten. Just go get him. That cabinet officer had responsibilities and he or she did not execute them. It's time to carry out the
one last thing. There is Jim Comer, the chairman of the House Government Oversight Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives, has said he will be calling these people to testify, as you just said. And before we close out, I just want to say the other people that ought to be indicted in public opinion is the American media, because those at the White House, so many of those reporters knew what the situation was, and they were not exposing it. They were acting like Biden was on top of his game. But Jeff, look, we got to get out.
An explanation. I think we have 10 seconds.
Go.
Jake Tapper has real chutzpah. He was one of the media who was covering this up and criticizing people like the people who were calling it to the public's attention, and then he writes a book about it to make money about it. Write the damn book
As
about
as if it was his reporting that exposed it. When anyone said
my
anything
God.
about Biden being incapable,
God. What-
Tapper criticized them. All right, we got to go,
What-
folks. Give us a
what-
thumbs up. We'll see you next week.
Chutzpah.